Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. Mike had always been a bit of a daredevil, but tonight he took it too far. Dressed in his wife's clothes and makeup, he thought it would be funny to surprise Pam at home, naming himself Michelle. He hoped this would open up their relationship to Michelle being more feminine, but little did he know this prank would lead to a crisis in their marriage. As Mike approached the house, he could see the lights on inside. His heart raced with anticipation as he carefully opened the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible. But his plan was foiled when Pam suddenly appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "What the hell are you wearing?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Mike tried to laugh it off, thinking Pam would eventually see the humor in his prank. But Pam wasn't laughing. She stormed over to him, her face contorted with rage. "How could you do this to me?" she cried, her voice rising to a scream. "Do you have any idea how much this hurts me?" Mike tried to explain that it was just a joke, but Pam wasn't listening. She pushed him hard, her hand stinging as it connected with his skin. Mike stumbled back, his eyes filling with tears. "You think this is funny?" Pam screamed, her voice hoarse with anger. "You think it's okay to dress up like me and make a fool of yourself?" Mike tried to defend himself, but Pam wasn't having it. She grabbed him by the collar of his dress and pulled him close, her eyes boring into his. "You've been playing with fire for a long time, Mike," she hissed. "But tonight, you crossed the line." With that, Pam shoved Mike away from her, her hands shaking with anger. Mike stumbled backwards, his legs giving out from under him as he fell to the floor. Pam watched him fall, her heart aching with pain and betrayal. As Mike lay on the floor, his face a mess of tears and makeup, Pam couldn't help but feel a sense of despair wash over her. She had loved Mike for so long, but now she wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again. Pam stormed off to her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Mike lay on the floor, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had messed up, but he didn't know how to fix it. As the night wore on, the tension between Pam and Mike only grew. They barely spoke to each other, their silence speaking volumes about the chasm that had opened up between them. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Pam couldn't take it anymore. She stormed back into the living room, her eyes blazing with anger. "I can't do this anymore, Mike," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I can't live like this, constantly wondering if you're going to betray me again." Mike tried to plead with her, but Pam wasn't listening. She grabbed her coat and purse, her eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye, Mike," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you find what you're looking for." With that, Pam walked out the door, leaving Mike alone in the silence of the night. As he listened to the sound of the door closing behind her, Mike knew that he had lost something precious, and he didn't know if he would ever be able to get it back. Mike was left with taking care of their kids. Weeks went by. Pam and Mike made an appointment with a counselor that could help their marriage. Mike, now being embracing Michelle, stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the straps of her dress. It was a simple yet elegant number, something she knew Pam would appreciate. She ran a brush through her hair, making sure every strand was in place. Today was a pivotal day for her, a day that could change everything. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She knew Pam would be there, and she didn't know how their encounter would go. But she had to try, had to show Pam that she was still the same person underneath the makeup and dress. As she left the house, she could feel the weight of Pam's disapproval on her shoulders, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. She arrived at Dr. Mora's office a few minutes early, her heart pounding in her chest. Dr. Mora greeted her warmly, leading her into his office. "Michelle, it's good to see you. How have you been?" Michelle sighed. "It's been tough, Dr. Mora. Pam and I haven't spoken since that night." Dr. Mora nodded. "I understand, but today is an important day. Pam is here and she's agreed to meet with you. We need to try and find a way to move forward." Michelle nodded, her heart racing. She could hear Pam's footsteps approaching and her palms began to sweat. Dr. Mora opened the door and Pam walked in, her eyes narrowing as she saw Michelle. "Michelle," she said, her voice cold. "What are you doing here?" Michelle took a deep breath. "Pam, I know I've hurt you, but I want to make things right. I want us to be able to move forward as friends or as partners. I just need you to give me a chance." Pam looked at her, her eyes filled with hurt and anger. "Why should I? You lied to me. You deceived me. How can I ever trust you again?" Dr. Mora stepped in. "Pam, I understand your feelings, but we need to try and find a way to move past this. Michelle is here, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Let's give her a chance." Pam hesitated, her eyes still locked on Michelle. Finally, she sighed. "Fine. But I won't make it easy for you, Michelle. You'll have to earn my trust." Michelle nodded. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Mora led them to a small conference room where they sat down across from each other. The tension in the room was palpable, but Michelle could sense a glimmer of hope. She knew that this was her chance to make things right, to show Pam that she was still the same person underneath the makeup and dress. As they sat there, Dr. Mora encouraged them to talk, to open up about their feelings. Michelle started by apologizing for her actions, explaining that she had been struggling with her identity for a long time. She told Pam about the confusion and pain she had been feeling, and how dressing up as a woman had helped her to cope. Pam listened intently, her expression softening as Michelle spoke. She could see the pain and confusion in Michelle's eyes, and she began to understand that this wasn't just a phase, but something much deeper. As they continued to talk, Michelle could feel the walls between them beginning to crumble. They started to laugh and share stories, and Michelle could feel the tension in the room dissipating. Dr. Mora intervened. "Pam, Michelle is here, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. You need to decide if you're willing to give her a chance." Pam looked at Michelle, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know, Dr. Mora. This is a lot to take in." Dr. Mora nodded. "I understand, but you both need to work through this together. Michelle needs your support, and you need to be willing to accept her for who she is." Pam sighed. "Okay, I'll give it a try, but I need you to promise me that you'll be honest with me, Michelle. I can't handle any more lies." Michelle nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I promise, Pam. I'll be honest with you, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust." They started living together again. The kids were glad their second mom was back, but it didn't last long. The fights continued. Pam couldn't accept her husband to be a girl. Days went by, but it didn't get much better. Michelle wanted to go outside to be alone for some time, but was very scared of others' judgment. That didn't happen much, but they did make another appointment with Dr. Mora. Michelle took a deep breath as she stepped out of the car, her heart pounding in her chest. She went outside sometimes, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming feeling of exposure that washed over her as she ventured into crowded public city. So far, she was able to hide most of the time, but today it was too busy. The sun was shining brightly, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. People bustled past her, chatting and laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that a transgender woman was taking her first steps into the world. Michelle felt a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, and a strange sense of liberation. As she walked, she noticed the way people looked at her. Some stared, their eyes lingering on her feminine features. Others barely gave her a second glance, treating her like any other person on the street. It was a strange feeling, being both noticed and ignored at the same time. Michelle had always been a people watcher, and today was no exception. She observed the way people interacted with each other, the way they carried themselves, and the way they responded to the world around them. It was a fascinating study, and she found herself lost in thought as she continued her journey. Finally, she arrived at the therapist's office. Dr. Mora greeted her warmly, leading her to a comfortable chair. Michelle took a seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the upcoming conversation heavy on her shoulders. Dr. Mora began the session by asking Michelle to explain her feelings and identity. Michelle hesitated for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel like I'm trapped in the wrong body," she said, her eyes downcast. I've always known that I'm a woman, but I've been living as a man for years. It's been difficult. Pam listened intently, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. But why now? She asked. Why are you choosing to transition now after all these years? Michelle took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Because I can't keep living like this, she said, her voice steady. I need to be true to myself, to live as the person I am inside. It's not just about how I look, it's about who I am. Pam looked at Michelle, her eyes filled with sadness and anger. But this is a big change, she said. It's going to affect our marriage, our family, everything. Are you sure you're ready for this? Michelle nodded, her eyes meeting Pam's. I've thought about this for a long time, Pam, she said. I'm not doing this lightly. I'm doing it because it's what's right for me. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence stretching out like a thick fog. Finally, Dr. Mora intervened, her voice calm and steady. Pam, Michelle is telling you the truth, she said. She needs your support and understanding. This is a difficult journey, but it's one that she needs to take. Pam looked at Dr. Mora, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can do this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's like everything I thought I knew about our marriage is falling apart. Dr. Mora placed a comforting hand on Pam's arm. I understand that this is a difficult time for both of you, she said. But remember, love is about acceptance and understanding. Michelle is still the same person she always was. She just wants to be true to herself. That's something we should all be able to support. Pam shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. I can't do this. I can't be married to a man who thinks he's a woman. It's sick. It's wrong. Michelle's heart sank as she listened to Pam's words. She had hoped that therapy would help bridge the gap between them, but it seemed like the divide was only growing wider. Pam, please. I'm not a man. I'm Michelle. I'm your wife, and I need you. Pam stood up suddenly, her fists clenched at her sides. I don't want a wife who's a freak. I want a normal husband. This is over. With that, Pam stormed out of the office, leaving Michelle alone with Dr. Mora. The therapist looked at Michelle with a sympathetic expression. I'm so sorry, Michelle. I truly thought that therapy could help you both. Michelle wiped away her tears, her heart heavy with sadness. It's okay, Dr. Mora. I understand. I just hoped that Pam could see past her prejudices. Dr. Mora reached out and took Michelle's hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. I know this is difficult, Michelle, but you're strong, and you'll get through this. Remember, you're not alone. Michelle nodded, grateful for Dr. Mora's support. As she left the office, she felt a sense of isolation that she had never experienced before. She had always been close to Pam, and now she was completely alone. Over the next few weeks, Michelle tried to pick up the pieces of her life. She threw herself into her work, determined to distract herself from the pain of her broken marriage. But no matter how busy she kept herself, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that haunted her every day. Pam, on the other hand, seemed to be thriving. She threw herself into her own life, filling it with new friends and activities. She refused to acknowledge Michelle's existence, and Michelle was left with no choice but to accept the reality of their situation. As the weeks turned into months, Michelle began to realize that her marriage was truly over. She had tried everything she could think of to make it work, but Pam was resolute in her rejection of her true self. Michelle knew that she couldn't continue living a lie, and so she made the difficult decision to transition fully into her true identity as a woman. The process was long and painful, both physically and emotionally. But as she emerged on the other side, Michelle felt a sense of freedom that she had never known before. She was finally able to be true to herself, and she knew that she would never again compromise her identity for the sake of someone else's comfort. As she navigated her new life, Michelle found that she was able to connect with others in a way that she never had before. She found a community of like-minded individuals who understood the struggles she had faced and who celebrated her for who she truly was. Pam, meanwhile, continued to live her life without acknowledging Michelle's existence. She never once reached out to reconcile, and Michelle eventually came to accept that their marriage was truly over. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare for Michelle. The court system was unforgiving, and his cross-dressing was used against him. Pam argued that he was not the man she married and that his actions had destroyed their family. The judge agreed, stripping Michelle of her rights as a father or mother. Michelle felt like her world was crumbling around her. She had lost everything: her marriage, her children, and her identity. The court's decision left her in a state of depression, unable to see a way out of the darkness. But then, something unexpected happened. Michelle's children, Tommy and Lily, came to visit her. They had been living with Pam, but they couldn't bear to be away from their new mother any longer. They told Michelle that they wanted to be with her, that they loved her no matter what. Michelle was overwhelmed with emotion. She had feared that her children would reject her, but instead they had chosen to stand by her side. She knew that she had to fight for them, to prove that she was still capable of being a good parent. The next day, Michelle went to court to appeal the decision. She argued that her cross-dressing was a part of who she was, and that it didn't make her any less of a parent. It took months, but after some time, the judge listened carefully, and after much deliberation, he agreed. Michelle was granted joint custody of her children, and Pam was ordered to pay child support. Michelle was elated. She knew that she still had a long road ahead of her, but she was determined to make things work. She moved into a new apartment, one that was more suited to her new identity. She decorated it with care, making it a warm and welcoming place for her children. Tommy and Lily were thrilled with their new home. They loved spending time with their mother, and they were grateful for the opportunity to be with her. Michelle made sure to spend quality time with them, taking them to the park, going shopping, and cooking their favorite meals. But the court proceedings had taken a toll on Michelle. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She knew that she needed help, so she began seeing a therapist. The therapist helped her work through her feelings of depression and self-doubt, and she started to feel more confident in herself. As time went on, Michelle began to rebuild her life. She found a job as a receptionist at a local law firm, and she started volunteering at a local shelter for the homeless. She was determined to make a difference in the world, to show her children that she was capable of being a good person, regardless of her past mistakes. As a mother, Michelle knew that she had a lot of work to do. She wanted to create a warm and welcoming environment for her kids, a place where they could feel loved and safe. She started by tidying up the apartment, putting away any items that were out of place, and making sure that everything was clean and tidy. Next, she turned her attention to the bedrooms. She wanted each of her children to have their own space, a place where they could retreat and feel comfortable. She spent hours decorating the rooms, hanging up pictures, and adding soft, cozy bedding. As the days turned into weeks, Michelle started to feel more and more confident in her role as a mother. She knew that she had a lot to learn, but she was determined to do everything in her power to provide her kids with the love and support they needed. As Michelle was cooking dinner, her son came into the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for being here for us. We love you so much." Michelle felt a surge of emotion as she heard her son's words. She knew that she had been through a lot to get to this point, but it was all worth it. She was finally a mother again, and she was determined to make the most of this second chance. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.